Greetings, and welcome to The Thirsty Mage, the podcast willing to submit ourselves to possible mental anguish in the name of RPG education. I'm your host, David Lloyd, and on this episode we'll be discussing one of the few RPGs released on the Nintendo 64, Quest 64. The Nintendo 64 was my coming-of-age console, and I've got some strong nostalgia towards it, and playing it again has been quite an adventure. But before we get into the discussion, let's meet the folks with me tonight. First up is the man who was so excited for Quest 64, he picked up the Game Boy spin-off and a strategy guide. NWR Reviews editor, Jordan Rudick.
Yeah, hi David. I think only one question remains, you'll agree with me. Quest 64, best RPG on Nintendo 64 or one of the best RPGs on Nintendo 64? We'll have to try to answer that question by the end of the episode.
Top three for sure.
Oh yeah, good call.
And also joining us is the man behind the initiative to take on this retro RPG, the better half of the Talk Nintendo podcast, Mr. Casey Gibson.
Yeah, man, it seemed like my N64 did not want me to play Quest. It did not want it in there.
It rejected it.
Twice over, dude. Ugh.
I had a little bit of problems too. Like Casey, you mentioned your power cable not working, and when I first started up the N64, I had the same issue where the game would actually just shut off after like a couple of minutes or something like that, as if it was literally spitting the game out and being, kind of telling me it's not today. But I took the cartridge out, I blew on it, I took the power adapter out of the N64 console, I blew on that, and I kind of just tried to shove it in tight into the back of the console, and it ended up working ever since.
So, man, I was scared there. So many jokes that could have been made with that statement.
Casey, this is a mature podcast for adults. We don't make jokes like that here. We'll save that for the Talk Nintendo episode.
We save that for the Dirty Mage episodes.
Yes, that's right. But I was thrilled that I hadn't bought the game, got the console out. I had to go and buy a memory card. I was glad I didn't do all of that for naught. David, you mentioned the strategy guide, which was actually quite good. I'll talk about it more later, but. Yeah, I'm glad your problems got solved, Casey, as well, because I thought you might jump ship tonight on a faulty N64.
I don't know, man. So my memory card messed up, but I didn't ultimately lose that much from that incident.
Yeah.
But then when I went to play the other day again, the power. I guess I should start from the beginning. I thought I had I know I had Quest somewhere, and I just don't know where the hell it is. So I ended up having to buy Quest and also a new power cable because I don't know where that was either. And then the other day I went to fire it up, and the power cable just did not work anymore. And I bought it off eBay, and it's one of those things where it's like, well, it did work when I first got it, and now it doesn't, so it's like I don't even think I could return it, or like try and get a refund or something, but it was certainly an adventure.
Someone's a true Quest 64 fan when they buy 2 copies of the game. That's all I need to hear.
Oh yeah, man.
I had a little bit of hassle myself. The first memory card I tried to use didn't work, so I don't know if that was just it didn't like that particular cartridge or. So I ended up swapping out, I think I have 3 or 4 of them, so I ended up just going through, I think on the third one, it was third time's the charm, I think. The first one I used a real Nintendo one, the second one was like a third-party one, and then I think I went back to my other Nintendo one for the third try, and it finally decided it would be okay to save, so I ended up playing, and then so far I've only had one crash, but it was kind of at a bad time because I had just gotten pounded on by a boss, so I'm like, okay, I better do some grinding. So after about 20 or so minutes probably 30 minutes of grinding, the game froze. And it was one of those where it's like late at night, so I just tossed the controller. It's like,
yep.
I'm going to
bed.
Yep, that's it for now.
I'll see how bad it is in the morning. Screw this.
I'm ready to do the podcast. I've got my material ready to go.
Yeah. So
it always sucks, and it's funny. Like recording an RPG podcast, like we can count on fingers and toes how many times this is. Maybe we can't. How many times this has happened to us in one of the games from this genre, right? Like the grinding, you've finished part of the story, you finished a chapter or something, and then for whatever reason you didn't save, or the file corrupts or whatever. Like it's almost just par for the RPG course that as a purveyor, as an enthusiast for the genre, you're going to encounter this from time to time. I mean, I used to get super mad about it. When I was a kid or a teenager or something, I'd get so choked about it. Now it's just like, I almost expect it. You have to, or else you're never going to get back to the game or go through it. And it's just part of it.
Like you said, it's just at the end of the night, when like you get hammered. And you're like, oh, and then the next day you're just like, man, I really wish I did not have to do this over again.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, the other thing that every RPG player has to have is a good stiff drink. So what do you guys got tonight?
Yeah, I can go first. It's pretty stiff, maybe not in the way that David would like, but it's August, 26th today, so some of us still consider it summer, but Starbucks does not. They have the pumpkin spice latte available here. Yeah, and I know Casey wanted to hear all about this, so it is fall according to Starbucks, so it is fall in this part of the world right now. Yeah, so I've got a pumpkin spice latte, and I forgot. Oh my gosh, the if you just get them straight up without making any adjustments, they are so like sickly sweet. It's just way too much syrup. So I forgot that you need to get it like half sweet, or I can't remember how many. Yeah, even quarter
That's
sweet.
How I do
whatever the number of pumps is, you need to divide that by a larger number. So
it's 4 pumps.
or some other figure. So it's just far too sweet. The Venti, I think it's 5 or 6 pumps or something like that. So I like the flavor of this drink. Like I'm definitely on the fan of pumpkin spice flavors, but I forgot how overpowering this one can be. I also got a pumpkin bread or pumpkin loaf, which are quite nice, and just like the banana bread at Starbucks, at least in Canada, dairy free. So I've got my pumpkin bread and my pumpkin latte, pumpkin spice latte, and I'm all ready to pumpkin my way through Quest 64 here.
Boom. Yeah, for me, as true and tried, I got my water, keeping hydrated. It's not 8:30 for everyone like Jordan, where he can enjoy such a drink. It's getting late.
It's decaf, Casey.
Yeah, I know. I know.
You could join me on the decaf train if you like.
I tell you what, I don't think I've ever had really a pumpkin spice coffee because, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm not really a huge pumpkin fan as far as like I don't like pumpkin pie. So I don't know if I'd really like pumpkin spice too much.
The thing is, pumpkin spice, it's not really pumpkin. It's the spices that might be connected with pumpkin flavored things. So maybe you don't like pumpkin itself, right? Yeah, cinnamon, nutmeg. I think maybe allspice or another one like that. And you should try it and not think of it as like, oh, this is what pumpkin tastes like, because I think it's quite different, right? Like pumpkin's a squash or a gourd or something like that, and I think pumpkin does have its own flavor. But the latte, like, I wouldn't say I'm going out and eating pumpkin every night or something like that. I do quite like the drink. But if you do try it, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, maybe one of these days. I'm not a Starbucks guy, so
that's fair.
I'd have to get it somewhere else.
I think a lot of people have jumped on that train, though. Tim Hortons has one. David will attest. I don't know if you've tried their version of it, but
no, I've never had a pumpkin spice latte. But the one indulgence I've had at Starbucks is the red velvet latte. And it's not. I don't. That. Sorry,
I haven't even seen that before.
Oh, this ain't on the menu. This is
okay.
This is the one where you say the red velvet and they'll know what you're talking about. But it's pretty bad because it's like 4 pumps of chocolate and 2 pumps of raspberry.
Oh yeah.
So that's why I usually ask for the 1/4 sweet red velvet with
that's
like
a lot of sugar.
in my once a year indulgence for the flavored coffee. But I've been meaning to try a pumpkin spice one of these days. But
what I would like is in December we'll have like a holiday episode, and we'll all bring our David. You can definitely Irish yours up, but we'll all bring like some kind of hot beverage like that, and see what we can do with it. I think that'd be fun.
Yeah, I'm
in the winter.
Sweet.
In the winter, you'll need to try. My favorite is the cardamom latte.
Okay, yeah. I've had cardamom ice cream before. It's not bad. I haven't tried a coffee with that flavor, though. The gingerbread I like. Here we are talking about Christmas drinks now. Or holiday drinks. Gingerbread I like. Yeah, I think they make like a mint one as well, which is nice.
I was going to say, we're already talking about pumpkin spice too early.
Hey, really? You know who to blame for that. If it wasn't on the menu, I wasn't going to be asking for it, so...
Well, don't worry, I'll bring it back home with a summer beer because I've stayed on my Lagerdale like last week with the clean, crisp, and I actually went with a themed one because this week I have one from Creemore Springs called Mad and Noisy because that's the feeling I had when I was playing when I rage quit on my my grind and I got mad and I got noisy. So
yeah,
this was. Yeah, this is a pretty good one. It was actually more expensive for some reason. It was like $6 for a can, which is, I mean, I wouldn't usually be dropping that kind of money for kind of a not a entirely, like, it was good for what it was, but certainly not worth twice what it should be. But
I mean, Casey gets 6 cans for $6 in his neck of the woods.
Yep.
I mean, Canadian beer is obviously jacked up price on its own, but that's a lot for a can.
Yeah. So, but. For the podcast, I had to go with the theme. It's been a while since I had a themed-based beer, so...
I love Mad and Noisy. Like, that sounds like how you feel when you're playing Quest 64. If you're, in Casey's case, if your N64 doesn't work and you can't find your second or third copy of the game, you get pretty mad and noisy at that point.
Honestly, I was just more defeated. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
It's like I just bought this stinking power cord and now it's not working.
Yeah.
Like, come on, dude. Killing me.
Okay, I want to segue this. I know we're going to start with our initial thoughts on the game, so I just want to get one out so I don't forget. Speaking of being defeated, something I do really appreciate about Quest 64 is that when you are defeated, you don't lose your progress, right? Any items you've picked up, any spirits or levels you've gained, that's all retained, and you're just sent back to I think it's the last inn that you stayed at. If you guys can correct me on that. And there's so many inns that you're never all that far away from where you died. So the nice kind of thing about this game is that, or one of the nice things, one of the initial things that I noticed was I think it's very playable, actually. Even in 2020, I think it's still in some ways accessible. In some ways not, but it's not like you can't play this game today. You can boot up this game and you can muddle your way through it. Probably easier if you have a guide or something because the story is a little bit obtuse and it's not always entirely clear where you need to go. But the maps are compressed. Like there's not a huge open world you're exploring. Like you can look at the map by pressing start and pressing R button a couple of times. You can kind of see where you're supposed to go and points of interest along the way. A guide would help you find all the spirit wisps, which are pretty important, actually. But yeah, I think my initial thought is that this game is surprisingly playable in 2020.
Yeah,
what do you guys think? I use the death as a form of quick travel.
Yeah, well, good point. Yeah, I did that too.
Yeah, I think I remember looking. The only things you would lose are any items you had like used just prior to death. So pretty much like if you
That's right, yes.
Yeah, if you were in like a boss battle and used all of your, items or whatever, you wouldn't get those back. But yeah, you keep the experience and everything you've gained otherwise, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it's makes it a little more playable. And I think really, like, just going back and playing it, yeah, it's like the battle system itself is a little strange, right? I mean, I guess RPGs have done it before where it's like, oh, to increase, your defense, you got to sort of get hit upon and stuff. But really, the only, I mean, not the only thing that's not great about this game, but it's just really barren, right? Like, there's not a lot going on. Not huge areas, but like, pretty sizable areas, and there's just not a whole lot going on. When you're traveling in between areas, it's just like, oh, you got a path, there's a field, oh, you're in the woods, oh, you run into some enemies, and that's sort of it.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of reason to explore a ton outside of finding the wisps and maybe finding some treasures. I don't think you really need a lot of the items, actually. Like, it's nice to have the healing items and the ones you can use to return to town, maybe. But you get those from just talking to the shop owner and the people at the inn. Like, you can get a lot of the items you need just from talking to some of the people in town. So exploring for treasures that are out of the way, I don't think you really need to do that very much. You do want to find those wisps that increase your elemental skills. There's 4 elements for people who haven't played this game: earth, water, fire, and air. Those determine the spells you gain, the spells you can cast as each level goes up. You gain new spells, but also the spells in that category become more powerful. So I raised earth and water, which I think is kind of the easy mode or the default way to go through the game, because water gives you a healing spell, and the earth spells are good for hitting multiple enemies on the screen. The battle system kind of grew on me as I played. I liked how, as the abilities got stronger, like in the earth category, you'd get avalanche, which would drop rocks from the sky that could hit multiple opponents and also hit them multiple times. But you also got something called rock shower, which was a similar type of spell, but hit every enemy on the screen, I think. So that was nice for clearing out groups of weaker enemies. It was fun to see the different spells that opened up as you leveled up each of the elements a little bit more. That said, you can't really diversify. Like, if you diversify too much, you're not going to be strong enough to defeat the bosses or maybe have enough healing ability to get through the longer dungeons. So it seems like there is maybe a better way to play the game, or an easier way or more efficient way that you want to kind of hit on early on.
Yeah, it's sort of actually... Maybe it was sort of a sign of the times, but yeah, it's almost like you had to have your set plan of what you're going to do as far as, like you said, sort of boosting your elements from the onset. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of messing around. And like, I think of like sort of Diablo 2, right? You sort of have to know what you want to do, otherwise you're just going to have sort of like a inferior build. And I know they added some things so you could sort of reset later on and down the road. But yeah, this one, yeah, like you said, if you start diversifying, like, oh, well, maybe I'll just put one in each and sort of get some spells here.
Yeah, it's such a mistake.
Yeah, you end up hamstringing yourself. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of echo the same sentiments. Like, to me, the battle system is kind of what makes the game playable. There's a lot of puzzle mechanics to a certain extent, because. The way the battle system works is that, like, you have this circle that you basically can fight within, and then if you travel outside the circle, you actually escape the battle. Mm-hmm. But while the enemy's attacking, you can actually move around. Figuring out how to dodge enemy attacks, I thought was kind of neat, along with the different kinds of spells and trying to like combine. Like you said, there's certain earth spells that attack multiple people. So I found the rolling rock one was kind of funny, because it would like roll from one side of the screen to the other, but you had to be kind of angled at the right way to be able to hit people. And so the battle system to me was kind of like the highlight of the game. But again, I'll echo Casey in the fact that there is not a whole lot. There's not much between battles. It's just basically walking from one battle to the next. Like the first field that you open up to, I think there's maybe like 3 trees, and then just like green grass and a brown path.
Well,
and it's like, okay, go from this town to the next.
Who knew SteamWorld Quest was his spiritual successor?
Yeah, that's right.
Hey guys, I like that game. I like that game a lot. Maybe I like it a little bit more than Quest 64. But I thought the search for the spirit wisps was enjoyable. Like I liked being able to see them in the distance and track them down, or kind of try to sometimes they're like hidden in a field or in stalks of grass and they're harder to find. Like, it was fun to explore and try to find more of those, just because they're so helpful, right? Like,
big time.
There aren't a ton of RPGs where there's something you pick up in the map and it's super helpful for your progress in the game, right? Like I think of something, it's a little bit related, but you think of something like Xenoblade, which we talked about a couple months ago. In Xenoblade, you pick up little items and little kind of collectibles on the map, little blue sparks of light or blue items on the ground. You pick those up, and you can use them to fill out an encyclopedia and get some items that way, or use them for fetch quests and things like that. But they don't really give you anything. But they are everywhere. I felt like these wisps, they weren't everywhere, but when you found them, it was meaningful because you knew they were going to give you a meaningful boost to your abilities. And so I did like kind of taking, going off the beaten path. Like when you go in a dungeon or a forest, you could just follow the road, but if you follow the road, you're probably not going to find the spirit wisps. So, spirit wisps, oh my god, I'm going to hate saying that word by the end of this podcast. But at any rate, it was fun to go off the beaten path a little bit and find those and know that every time I did, like, oh, this was really good for my character, and it was going to make me, noticeably stronger. Like every couple of levels you gain in an elemental category, you gain a new spell, or you at the very least you see a noticeable difference in the effectiveness of your spells. For example, with the healing category, like, so you get healing from the water elemental at level 7. So
I was going to say 6 or something.
Is it 6? Yeah,
I think,
6
I don't
or
know,
7.
around
So,
there, yeah.
Yeah, so once you get
It's
the
early
healing
on.
spell, it is very early on. Once you get the healing spell, almost every point you put into water raises the amount you heal yourself by 1 point. So it is a noticeable increase to that healing ability. Sometimes you gain stats in other games or you gain levels, and it's not noticeable how your character is getting better. But in this one, I felt like even with the other stats, like with health or HP or MP, like you see those numbers go up. Kind of instantaneously, right? Like as you get hit more by enemies, your HP goes up like 1 point, or when you fight a boss, because you can take a lot of damage during a boss fight, it can go up like 15 points after the boss fight. I thought it was kind of nice and seamless how there wasn't an experience screen and here's the experience you gained, here's the gold you earned. We're so used to that. Like I felt like the way you got in and out of combat was really quick and snappy, and I thought that was a plus here.
Yeah, I was going to also sort of riding along how it's sort of different from other RPGs. I don't think you do get gold, right, or anything like that. It's all just either
no money.
found in towns or given to you, any items and stuff. Like there is no purchasing, which is definitely different. But I almost sort of like it. It feels sort of more akin to like what's going on. Like I always laugh in RPGs, or like even like WoW Classic, like things like, oh yeah, like this big terrible thing's coming and it's gonna destroy the world, but like, man, like I'm gonna need some gold, or you know what I mean? Like, oh, you need some items to go take care of that for me. Like, yeah, but you gotta pay me for them. It's like, well, I'm trying to help you out, dude. Like, at least you cut me some slack here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before we get too more detailed into the different systems, maybe we'll just start with who made the game and why. Because this developer is not one that comes to mind usually. So this was developed by Imagineer Company Limited, which was this is a Japanese company started back in 1986, and really was they formed to create software. But what they mostly were known for was publishing Western titles in Japan. So I think one of the bigger titles back then was publishing SimCity in Japan. So they would take these Western developed games and publish them there. So but they did do a few games, developed a few games, none that I have really ever heard of. But the other one of note that I saw was Super Space Knighter Pro Baseball King 2, actually.
That's a great name.
Yeah, that was great for another Nintendo 64 game. So it's. I mean, we play so many games from kind of like the pillars of RPGs. When you look at like Square and Atlas and Bethesda and BioWare and all these things, and you see so many of these games, and then to see a developer I've never heard of was it was a bit unique. It's like not even an indie either. Like this is a company with like I think they have over 100 employees and everything, so it's neat to see to play something other than the usual crew that we usually are with.
So they actually published the GB Color game Brian's Quest, or what the hell is it called? Brian's Journey. Sorry, Quest subtitle Brian's Journey. They published that one in Japan. Do you want to guess who published that in North America? Starts with an S.
Square?
Nope. They did like Batman on NES, I believe, and maybe other licensed games on NES, Game Boy. That kind of that time period.
I'm gonna pass on this one.
Yeah.
Sunsoft.
Sunsoft.
Okay.
Oh,
Yes. I know you guys would know them. They did a lot of games, but yeah. So I guess they published Quest Brian's Journey in North America, but Imagineer was attached to this one as well.
Okay, yeah, because I know THQ was the one that published the Western release of Quest. And it's funny, like, so this company that usually brings in games from the West and publishes them in Japan develops this game that largely was like it came to the West first. I believe it was several years before they even published in Japan.
Yeah,
so
I remember reading it.
Pretty much developed for the West.
Yeah, pretty significant time gap. I'm looking here. So it came out in North America June 1st, 98, and didn't come out in Japan until July 9th, 1999. So a year, 13 months. So pretty good.
And high expectations at being the first RPG for the Nintendo 64.
I read too that they sort of took some of the criticisms and sort of made it a little more streamlined for the Japanese release. So that might actually be the definitive version to play.
So what Casey is saying to everyone
Time
out
to
there,
import, baby.
Naturally, we're going to be importing the Japanese version,
and hopefully I can get a non-faulty power cable.
Oh, you're gonna have to buy probably 2 or 3 consoles,
Converters.
probably 4 copies of the Japanese game, and a dozen memory cards just to get it to work. Case, but maybe David and I can pitch in for that.
It'll be worth it.
I wanted to say that Casey, you mentioned the kind of or David, you mentioned that this was the first RPG on N64, and I think it carried with it so many expectations. Right? You think about the North American audience specifically. In Japan, obviously, the Super Famicom had so many RPGs as well, but just so many. You come from the previous console having so many RPGs, but not just in number, but also in terms of quality. The amount of strength that the RPG lineup had on Super Nintendo, Super Famicom was maybe still unmatched to this day. And so there's this expectation among all these RPG fans you've created on Super Nintendo for the next Nintendo console. Okay, we're all waiting. Mario 64 are great. Mario Kart 64, awesome. A lot of really good games on N64, but none for the RPG fan, right? So if you were a Nintendo fan who maybe bought a Super Nintendo for all the RPGs, or you really developed a fondness for that genre on the console, to pick up Nintendo's next console and be waiting for an RPG of that caliber to come out, and then this is what you get. I think there's no question you were going to be disappointed. I feel like there was such a burden on Quest 64 to live up to this RPG expectation. There was no way it was going to do that. Like I think a lot of the hatred for this game comes from the fact that it is one of the first and one of the only RPGs on the console, and people were just expecting so much more based on what the previous console offered.
And then especially what other consoles were offering. I mean, Final Fantasy VII came out a year prior to Quest 64. So
that's right.
I was just going to say that. Imagine seeing or even playing Final Fantasy VII and then being a Nintendo owner, and then you're looking at what you've got instead.
That was probably enough to convince some people to make the change. I do remember my neighbors. They had an N64, and they ended up selling it and getting a PS1. And I remember being like, "What a bunch of idiots!" And I was a Super Nintendo fanboy, so I still stick to that rationale. But RPGs, man, definitely did a little better over on the PS1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. I didn't even thought about that. Like it's not just competition with what came before, but all of the Final Fantasy goodness that was coming out on PlayStation, and even the expectation, like, oh, where are our Final Fantasy games on the N64, right? Why is Sony getting all this quality RPG goodness, and then, guys, don't worry, we've got it's got 64 in the title. That almost added a legitimacy to it, or attempted, right? Because so many Nintendo published and developed games had 64 at the end. I think it would go on that the console just kind of did this, like so many games would use 64, but it felt like it's designed specifically for this console. It's got that number in there. Like it to me, maybe to a younger me, it connoted quality, right? I was expecting that. So it's like just impossible to live up to, I guess.
It's like the DE on half the Switch games for Nintendo these days.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's right.
Yeah. The good, the bad, and the ugly. All right, well, we're stepping up the production value for the Thirsty Mage, and we've got a new segment: the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the way we're going to be
don't talk about yourself
looking at this
like that, David.
Yeah,
Jeez.
I know you.
Got him.
Got
him.
Yep. Set myself up for that one. I can't. I have to admit. Yep.
The question is, are you the bad or the ugly? But we'll leave that up to the imagination.
We know Quest is the good.
Yeah. But yeah, you sons. Well, we're going to be going through the elements, in the sections good, bad, and ugly. So we'll start with the good because it's always good to start positive, and we've touched on it a bit, but maybe we can get a little more detailed about the combat mechanics. So, like we were saying, so it's random encounters, except for the bosses. The bosses you can actually see on the screen, but the everyone else is a random encounter. So you'll just be walking on the overworld. And when a random encounter pops up, you don't actually leave the world. You stay in the same spot. Kind of just puts us kind of a circle around you, and the enemies are within it, and they have their own circles of movement that they can work in. And it's basically take out the bad guys, and that can be done with the spells that we were talking about that are based on the elements. So you have your magic meter for that. You have your HP meter. Those are the only 2 meters you really need to worry about. And then you also have the ability to just club the bad guys with your wand or
knock them
staff,
down.
I guess would be
Staff, yeah.
Just knock them in the head. The progress system is kind of Kawazu-like in the sense of
yes, very much.
Yeah, that so there's 4 different stats that you have to worry about. So like I said, 2 of them are HP and MP. So the HP actually increases based on attacks. Like, so the more that you use your physical attack, the quicker your HP will increase with time. Same with magic. The more you use your magic, the more it increases. Which worked well when you heal yourself, because that's
right.
what I was doing. Majority of my playthrough is after a battle, just healing myself. Then the other 2 are agility and defense. So defense goes up the more you get hit. Agility goes up the more you dodge attacks. So pretty neat. It's kind of bare bones in a sense, but easy to learn and fun to master, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like, again, you don't have an opportunity to explore the elements too much, but I think there's a lot of different. There might be like 14 or 15 different spells you get per element, and some of them are just higher level ones, like the rock toss is like the standard earth ability that you have, and rock toss level 2 and 3 is just a bigger rock that you're throwing, which is kind of funny. So it's not really about doing more damage with higher level spells. Your damage is connected to the level of your element, but it's about being able to use different size projectiles, I suppose, and line them up properly. So it's testing a different skill than RPGs normally would, right? Your positioning within your circle and relative to your enemies was really important. We wouldn't see, David, you'll like this reference. It reminded me a little bit of the Trail series, where you've got the circles and attacks that can hit in a line or something. Obviously, in the Trails games, you get an indicator of where your attack is going to land land and who it's going to hit. In Quest 64, it's a little bit more trial and error. But I liked, testing out the different spells, finding out where the best place to stand to use them was. It's always a little bit of a challenge in every battle, and even with different enemy types, trying to figure out the best positioning for you and the best spells to use. Because enemies have their own elements that they're attached to. So if you're fighting a fire enemy, if you use water attacks, it'll do more damage, obviously. So you have to keep in mind stuff like that too. So I think the combat and the progression are enjoyable elements of this game that maybe don't get mentioned all that much in talking about Quest 64. Everyone seems to kind of focus on the bad and the ugly parts.
Yeah, no, I definitely, going back, I remembered about the elements, and I think early on, way back in the day when I was playing this, I feel like it was one of those, sort of spreading the wealth, if you will, with my wisps. And so going in now, I was like, all right, I'm going to focus on the 2, and it is sort of interesting, too, if you run into a boss where it's like, oh, I don't have his weakness, or maybe the element you're really sort of leaning into just happens to be their, element of choice as well. So it does put a little bit, makes it a little bit more difficult in that sense. But yeah, I enjoyed, sort of going back and just getting the different, like you said, the different abilities. And I went with fire and water. So some of the fire ones, like, you got the fireball, and then you unlock the second fireball, or fireball 2, which gives you a second one, and then you actually get power staff. So it actually just,
yes, that's right.
It boosts up your physical damage, but as we know, the first boss you run into, you don't want to be anywhere near that guy, because he's going to ruin your day. But like you said, I think it was definitely a different take, obviously not a, turn-based RPG or anything along those lines, but it added some different wrinkles into it, and like you said, surprisingly, is still pretty interesting today.
Actually, just to maybe disagree with you a little bit. I mean, it is turn-based, but it's turn-based in a funny way, because first, so it kind of alternates, right? But your character Brian gets multiple turns for every turn that the enemies get, right? So based on the agility stat, an enemy will go first, or Brian will go first, and then. So let's say an enemy's faster than you, like one of the rabbits, the hares that you fight early on. If the hare is faster than you, it goes first, then you go, and then if there's a second hare, the second hare will go, and then you'll go again. So it's not like every turn you go, all the enemies get to act. Instead, you always get a turn after one enemy goes. And I think that is something I don't really remember ever seeing in a turn-based RPG, which kind of conflates the definition of turn-based, because it's not exactly like you can move around to avoid attacks. You have to move around in your circle to position yourself for the attack you're going to do. And then the fact that the turn allocation is more slanted towards you, towards Brian. Like I don't know if you guys have seen that in another game before. It was new to me, and I kind of like it, actually. It's nice to have more turns.
Yeah, it's empowering,
Definitely.
Yeah, you can use it to your advantage too, because depending on the placement of the enemies, like usually I would try to take out the ones closest to me, so I would try or move around, like, because once you've gone through one round, it's always the same order as well. So like if you have 3 enemies and all 3 get a turn, they do all their turns in the same order again. So you always know who's about to attack you.
Yeah, so you can position
after that initial go through.
Good
so
point.
You can position around.
Yeah.
So they're like, for example, and especially when you know the attacks, like with the wind attacks, just standing still is the best procedure, because usually the wind attacks, if you're far away enough, they just kind of like they have homing. The wind attacks are kind of like a homing, where they're like 3 come at you and they'll follow you around. But if you just stand still, they just do a circle around your body, and you usually never actually get hit.
That's right. Yeah.
And then when the bad guys use earth attacks, that's when you want to get really close to those enemies, because the rocks actually can't hit you if you're standing beside them. It'll just go over your head. Later on, the fire attacks, the early fire attacks were kind of, there's not a whole lot you can do to avoid those ones because it's just like a straight shot at you. But later on, there's a fire attack where it's like 3 fire rocks that are shot at you. So if you can kind of position yourself, like one comes, the further back, the easier it is, but one comes straight at you, so you kind of just pivot to the left or right a little bit, and then the 2 on each side, as long as you're far enough back, they'll miss as well. And then the water, I think, was like a close, the enemy had to be close to
It's like
you
a
too.
waterfall kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like a water pillar that comes up from the ground that hits you. So again, knowing what's coming at you, and then as the game goes on, you really know what's coming at you too, because the enemies are just like reskins of old enemies. Like they're in the forest. Like there's these puppets. I can't remember the names of them, but there's like these puppet looking characters, and then the next forest after you get off the ship, it has the same puppets, but they're like differently colored, but they still do the same elemental type attacks, like the next step up. So yeah, it's the progression system is definitely like the most fun for me, just because the strategy involved is like you're never, it's never like confusing you, but it's enough that like you can build a strategy around staying alive. And you kind of really need it, because to kick off the bad section, I would say, is there's a lot of difficulty spikes in this game. I felt like going from one area to the next is like a huge jump, and even early on, like the first boss is probably like 5 to 10 minutes into the game if you just kind of walk towards him. But you need to do some grinding, because that guy will just pound you like very quickly. Yeah.
I was watching a video on that, and it seemed like the wind element was the way to go, because you could stay nice and far away from him. It like you said, sort of like the wind cutters or like little boomerang things. They go and get him, and then he shoots out that like big straight blast at you. And I guess if you play well and you got some decent agility, you can actually sort of almost dodge like all of his attacks. So the video I was watching, like,
definitely.
the guy like just clowned him pretty much, you know what I mean? And I was thinking, I was like, man, like we were all getting our ass kicked.
Well, my problem is that I kept running out of magic. Like I kept hitting him with the rock, so it would take like 10 points off me every time I hit him. But he had 200 HP, so what would happen is I'd hit him for like 100, and then I'd run out of magic, and then it was basically like...
Then you gotta go whack him. But then you're in range.
Yeah, you gotta go whack...
Yeah, his the close range attack he does, where it's an earth attack, and he kind of slams the ground, and rocks appear all around him. It does a lot of damage, and you cannot avoid it. Like I don't think there's any way, if you're in range to do melee attacks, you can't dodge that one. So yeah. you have to either bring some potions to restore your MP, or just grind a little bit, right? Like try to get a little bit stronger, and then so you can do more of the earth magic at a safe distance. Or like you said, Casey said, the wind one. I hadn't tried that one, but that's a really good strategy too.
Yeah, but it just seemed like so then, you beat the boss, and then you're on the path towards the ship, and like those enemies seem like they're just like head and shoulders above the enemies you just fought in the forest. And then you get on the ship and you go to the next section, and they're even tougher enemies. So in a lot of cases, like there's times where you just gotta fight because like you cannot just escape attacks and hope to survive. Like you really need to build up those stats as you're going, and really try not to avoid too many random attacks. Like you really have to take on those battles to build yourself up.
Yeah, I don't know if... I mean, I don't have any, evidence that this is true, but I have to imagine maybe that was intentional to sort of pad out the game, right? N64 RPGs, sort of the era of where... how long is that game? Is that a 40-hour game? You know what I mean? I remember that big back then was like the hour count was a very important thing with games, especially RPGs, right? You wanted a big, beefy, long RPG, and maybe this was their way of sort of artificially making it longer. Like, hey, yeah, like you could sort of get to that area pretty quick, but you're gonna have to really put the time in to actually be able to get through it properly, you know?
Yeah. Well, and the story is certainly not going to add to none of the time, because that's kind of the second bad point I had about Quest 64, is that there's virtually no story.
Yeah.
Like the basis of the story is that Brian's father is like Brian is a apprentice wizard at a monastery, and his father, I guess, like is an elder there or something. And they had a book, like a magical book, that was stolen by a thief, and the father went out to find the thief before he could use it for to cause destruction. And they haven't heard from the father, so that's why Brian is setting out. He's going out to find out what happened to his dad, and not a whole lot happens between the beginning of the game to the end of the game. Like that's the bulk of the story. Like even when you're going, I found that a lot of the story it was basically to get to where to go next. Like the first boss is not even really part of Brian's story per se. It was a thief that had stolen, I think, the Earth globe, or the Earth
orb
gem,
yeah.
or something. The Earth orb from like the neighboring town, and so it's like, well, you can't go through the forest until you get the Earth orb back. So that's like the whole premise of the beginning of the game is, okay, I'm doing this favor for this town, so they'll open the door so I can continue on my journey, and that's just like, and the exact same thing happens in the next town. They're in trouble. They need Brian to help so that he can continue on, and that. So yeah,
they probably advertise that as side quests.
Yeah, but I mean, there's
Side Quest 64.
Yeah, there are NPCs along the way, but I'm like, they're not really adding to the story. They're more of a guide through the game more than like story progression.
I mean, the only people I talked to were Shannon, who you find in almost all the inns in the game, kind of a meaningful character that plays a little bit of a role later on. And then I talked to the people in the towns who would give you free things. So the shopkeeper, or sometimes the person at the inn. Or the bar, I guess, the bartender, yeah. So they'll give you like free bread or a free potion or something like that. So I'd always talk to them. The wings to send you back to town was another helpful item to get, I found. I mean, you're right about the story not being really that important here. It's not. I think a funny thing they do that's maybe, yeah, I guess definitely part of the bad category is they combine, like you guys were saying, they combine the things you need to collect, like the Earth orb or the Earth crystal. They combine that with the gate is closed. We need to open the gate, or there's a bandit blocking the gate. Like they seem to combine the thing you need for your ultimate goal with the smaller things that are happening in the kingdom or the village where you are. So it's almost like every time you go to a new place, you kill two birds with one stone, and it's like this huge amount of progression you make story-wise, you make all at once, and so none of it feels very satisfying or meaningful. It's very much like it just kind of done for simplicity's sake, or just to help advance the game or advance the story forward, rather than in service of any good storytelling or narrative or character development. So yeah, there's really none of that. Like, and certainly no character development that I could really notice.
No.
It's pretty much you talk to one person in the town, they tell you what the problem is, you go solve the problem. By solving the problem, you also get the thing you need for Brian's quest, and then you're so happy that you've done two things all at once. It's it just maybe convenient is a word for it, rather than something that I found very enjoyable.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I guess that brings us to the final category that we have, which is the ugly. And I mean, nothing. I wouldn't say there's anything too egregious in the game that it's like, don't play it because of this. But there's certainly a few things that certainly, busted my craw. And we touched on one, which is kind of the endless walking in a void. When you're walking from place to place, there's not a whole lot going on in between, like we said, with the trees. I think one of the worst places that I encountered this was the cave. The name of the cave is escaping me, but the cave to get from the second town to the third town.
Yeah.
Where they're like, well, the bridge is out, so you got to go through the cave, and it's like, okay, but the cave took forever, and it kind of comes to my second point that bothered me in the game, is that it's so easy to get turned around and not realize where you came from or where you're going. Now they do have a compass that's on the map, but a lot of the time the path kind of winds like an S. So you'll be I'll be watching on the compass. It's like, okay, I'm going north, and then all of a sudden, you're in a random battle and the camera angle has changed. So when the battle is, you're running around in the circle and you're fighting the things, and then when the battle's done, you got to remember, okay, I was going north. So then you got to go, start going back to north. But if you start to forget exactly the way you were going before the battle starts, you could end up walking right back the way you came.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times there's not even a visual indicator of like, here they could have used things like even signs or
the water cavern does use signs. It actually has arrows pointing which way you're supposed to go, but that I didn't notice that in any of the forests or dungeons prior to that, any kind of real sign posting. The dungeon you're referring to, David, is called Cull Hazard, and I did the exact same thing. I went halfway through, I picked up a couple of treasures and spirit wisps, and then I kept walking, and I got right back to the beginning of the dungeon. I'm like, what is going on here? And then I had to pay more. You really do have to pay attention to the compass to make sure that you're not, if you were going north, that you don't kind of switch and start going south. Like, you have to kind of keep going the same direction, or I guess that's how you pay attention, because everything looks the same, right? In the dungeons, they're very, very plain looking. And everyone knows like the N64 kind of blocky graphics in the environments, but that cave also has a ton of mist in it, which makes it even harder to see. Like, it's just, that's definitely one of the least fun parts of the game.
Yeah,
for sure.
I was even getting turned up like early on, like, before you even get to the first area, you're like, oh, I fight a couple of bad guys, and like you said, you get turned around, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, I'm back at the freaking first town again. Like, what's going on here? Which I knew wasn't necessarily a bad thing, because you got to get those, got to grind in, right? So it's like, well, at least I'll fight some more enemies on the way back. But, and I think it also, like you said, it's just so barren, right? Like, obviously, like signs would be great, but even if it was just like well-placed trees, you know what I mean, to like, oh, like I'm walking towards that tree, you know what I mean, or something along those lines. But I don't know. Yeah, it just almost feels like I would love to see like the development. Was it super rushed? You know what I mean? Was this something where it's just like, oh crap, like we got to get this going, like just make them whatever, just have the areas A to B, and they were trying to really rush it out? Or was it something maybe they couldn't get it running with more, too many objects, in the area, and maybe that the one area it did actually work out where they could put some signs, or maybe that was something they developed later and were like, oh man, we need to sort of, straighten this out a little bit. But yeah, they definitely don't do a great job. And I think that's probably what led to a lot of people's frustrations, is just like, man, I'm getting turned around. I'm doing these battles that, like, are weird. I don't like this game, and maybe that's where it sort of stems from, because it most definitely is easy to get lost.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was reading some old reviews, and that's one of the things that kept coming up, was that, now, like, whether or not it's any fact to it, but a lot of the reviewers were mentioning that the development was rushed, like that there was, that they were trying to get the development done quickly. So, that was a long time ago, so it's hard to say if it was more of a rumor than factual argument, but it certainly seems that way because of like you said, there's so little in the game. Even the first kind of dungeon, which is the forest, I did the exact same thing where I went to the boss, fought the boss, came back, and got into a couple fights and ended up back at the boss's front door again because I had gotten turned around. But even in that dungeon, there's one tree that's different from the rest, because it has like you can kind of go through it, like there's like kind of like an arch tree. And that was the tree where, I'm running towards the tree, and I got in a fight there, and I'm like, and I kept trying to use that as the visual identifier, like, okay, there's the tree, so I got to go this way. But even the way the arch is, like even though it's distinctive, it's still hard to tell. Like, should I be going north from the tree or south from the tree? I don't remember. Like, it's just really weird that way. And the other fun thing that I always chuckled about when I read these old reviews is almost every review I was reading was comparing it to Final Fantasy VII and how it does not measure in any way. And I'm like, man, like that. This is I guess there's the timing of it and the fact that it was the first RPG and the fact that that was the game that Square left Nintendo for. I guess there's really. I guess you can't really get around the comparison. Like it was just that at the time that's you had to compare them because of the history there. But seeing how it was like trashed compared to Final Fantasy VII, you almost wonder if they didn't have that development rush and put a little bit more time into it and didn't have the shadow of Final Fantasy VII lurking over them, would it have been received a little bit better?
Yeah, it like you said, it's poor Nintendo 64 RPG fans. All they wanted was Final Fantasy VII, and all they got was Quest 64, man.
Yeah. Do you guys have any final thoughts about Quest 64 before we move into Last Call?
I don't think people should necessarily avoid it. I think there's something fun about playing a game like this. It is definitely an outlier. It's not a pinnacle of the genre or anything like that. But I think it does some things well, and I think people hate on it more for what's around it rather than what's actually in the game itself. I think if you play it, you'll find some redeemable qualities. You know, it's grindy. There's a random encounter rate can be pretty high, but we've seen those things in other RPGs. You know, I think there's enough kind of content here. I was actually surprised. I was flipping through my guidebook. Like, you know, I kind of stopped after getting the water gem, but there's still a fair amount of content left in the game for me to do, and I might, you know, if I don't have too many reviews to take on, I probably will go through that. But I don't know. I was pleasantly surprised playing this game. I didn't hate it as much as I didn't hate it. I didn't feel as negative as maybe we had been joking about, or, you know, thinking of playing Quest as a punishment. Like, if I had to play the whole game and do a review of it for some kind of losing a contest with you guys or something, I wouldn't be all that upset about it. Like, I think my enjoyment was definitely heightened by having this guidebook. I think it's a Prima guide. I'm just gonna grab it here. So it is a Prima guide. It's pretty good. It tells you where the spirit wisps are. The maps are decent. It tells you kind of like exactly what to do in terms of a walkthrough. It lists all the spells that you can get in all the categories. Like, it's a good guidebook. And I think having we did a Xenogears episode last year, and I had the guidebook for that. And that was a terrible one. Like, my enjoyment of Xenogears was not heightened by the guidebook, but definitely with Quest 64, it is an RPG that I think does benefit from having a guide or a walkthrough, so you're not wandering around too aimlessly. But even if you don't, like, again, the land areas that you're walking through are not all that big. The tunnels you go into can be confusing because it's easy to get turned around. They're so nondescript. But if you're just walking around the countryside, there's a map. It kind of confuses me why the interior spaces don't always have a map. Like, if you go into a forest, it doesn't have its own map when you press start. It just shows you the map of the larger area, and then you're just kind of sitting on the forest icon itself. So yeah, obviously there's things that could have been done here, but I don't think it's as bad as it was made out to be. I think a lot of it is just comparing it to something like Final Fantasy VII, which is totally unfair because Final Fantasy VII is one of the greatest RPGs ever made by a company that has made hundreds of RPGs, and that was maybe them at the height of their power or something like that. You know, like they've really figured out how to harness the PlayStation's capabilities. To compare to Quest 64 is laughable, right? Like, they're not the same. David, you mentioned this is one of Imagineer's few games that they actually developed themselves. Is that right?
Yeah, like they've developed a few, but they're more of a publisher than a developer.
Yeah, so to fault them entirely for what Quest 64 became, and I can see why Nintendo would maybe put pressure on these guys to rush this out. Like, hey, we don't have an RPG right now. Square abandoned us. can you throw together an RPG? We know you don't really do this, but do you have any ideas? Like, fine, you came up with Quest 64. It's really not that bad. I think people, if you haven't tried it, it's not a bad title to just kind of dive into and see how you feel about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it gets a bad rep, not completely undeserved. Obviously, we talked about some things that are really not great about the game, but I mean, I wonder too, like, people play RPGs, right? It's sort of the two camps, right? It either has a really fantastic story that really grabs you and makes you just want to find out what happened or what's going to happen, character development and stuff. Or it's like, I could think of some like action RPGs where it's like, yeah, I don't care about the story at all. I'm just going through and I'm having so much fun with the combat, you know what I mean? And like this sort of falls in the middle to the middle / really bad. So obviously with the story we mentioned, there really is no story. A few little tidbits here and there, and then you're on your way. So, it doesn't grab you there at all. And then the combat itself, like you said, it's an interesting, sort of battle system. Not terrible or anything, but it also doesn't really grab you so much where you're like, oh my god, I'm having so much fun, So I feel like it just doesn't have that it factor that's sort of, dragging you along through some of these more grindy spots and spots where you can get lost. So I do wonder if, maybe they really leaned into, developing a story that was intriguing and interesting, if that could have sort of helped with the reception as well. But yeah, it just sort of seems, inevitable that they would be, sort of thrusted upon against, Final Fantasy. And unfortunately for them, Final Fantasy VII just happened to be, like Jordan said, one of the best games, 20, yeah. What's it, 20, is it 20 years? When did this, 23 years ago, I guess, give or take, was Final Fantasy VII?
Yeah.
3 years ago, and we're still talking about it. We're still playing it. We just played it. Was it this year? Or was it last year? It was last time's flying, man.
Yeah.
We just played it last year and had a discussion about it. So it's, it's an interesting sort of spot in history, and like what Jordan was saying, if you do have an N64 and you sort of stumble across a Quest 64 copy that, isn't too expensive, I implore you to try it out. Maybe you only play it for an hour, but at least you'll sort of know what's going on, and realize that, maybe all the hate isn't, necessarily, warranted.
Yeah, I mean, you can pick up a copy of this game for probably somewhere in the $10 to $25 range, depending on, if you get it from eBay or Craigslist or something like that. I think if you can get this game cheaply, I think you should try it. I think a lot of people will realize it's not nearly, this horrible abomination that it was made out to be. It just has the kind of reputation for it because N64 and Nintendo at that time, they didn't have people making RPGs for that system. And so N64 ended up focusing on 3D platformers and multiplayer experiences. And the single player experiences on Nintendo 64, some of them are lacking, right? Like they don't have maybe all the depth that we would want them to. But yeah, as I say depth, and of course it's a three-dimensional game. But yeah, at any rate, David, what about you? What do you think? What's the
just to finalize the Quest 64 talk and kind of segue into the last call is I almost wonder if they did the best they could with the system they had. Like the Nintendo 64 really, like the design of it is more, it just seemed more focused on like the 3D aspect, so more of the platforming or the action, the action based. It really wasn't. I don't know if the system was really designed in a way that would make it advantageous to do an RPG. So I almost wonder if this is like the best they could have done with what they had. So like you guys said, I think it's worth playing. I think the unique combat system is definitely worth checking out to experience. And like I said, it's not a terrible game, but I think for Nintendo 64 standards, they did a pretty good job. And yeah, it's just And it's one of those things too, like at the time, obviously Square saw what the Nintendo 64 was capable of doing and what the PlayStation was capable of doing, and ultimately I think they made the right call. So.
This is the last call for alcohol this evening. Drink up, drink up, drink up, and order again. This is the last call for alcohol. Get going.
Yeah, so that kind of takes us into the discussion I wanted to have for last call, which is looking back on the Nintendo 64. Like, the further we get away from it, the more I'm curious about what you guys think the legacy of it will become. I know there's still people out there. Like I said, this was the system. I'm pretty sure I paid my own money for this system. I still remember my first part-time summer job, and almost positive that I had to use that money to buy a Nintendo 64, because I was kind of like a young teenager at the time, I guess, kind of 13, 14ish, or around there, I think it was. And so, I mean, this was kind of my time, the Nintendo 64, and I have nostalgia for it. And I know a lot of people have been calling to have the Nintendo 64 games added to the Nintendo Switch online service, but I'm curious, like, the further we get from it, are we going to start to realize more and more that these aren't terrific games, or do you think there's some redeeming value there?
I mean, for me, I have the nostalgic feelings for it because, growing up, we had an NES and a Super NES, but it was like those things were already just like, as far back as I could remember, like, we had those, right? So, like, N64 was really the first one where it was like, oh, baby, like, we need this, you know what I mean? Like, please, like, for Christmas, like, I'll do anything, Mom, you know? So, for me, it definitely has a special place in my heart from that point of view, but, yeah, when you look at the games, it's sort of, like, some of them are so good, and then some are just, like, not so good, and it was just a really interesting time, right? Because everyone's sort of experimenting in the 3D space. It almost feels like the NES, right? Where it was like, you have some really amazing games, like that, like you're like, holy cow, like Mario 3, you know what I mean? Like those games are still amazing today, but like a whole lot of them, like, you play for a little bit and you're like, okay, these are like, oh, I could see what they're doing here, like this was cool, you know, but like it just isn't that fun, you know? And I feel like N64, like a lot of games sort of fall in that category where it's like, oh, I see what they're trying to do here, and it just, you know, it didn't hit the mark, or, you know, especially now, you know, I'm not like a big graphics snob, I should say, I guess, but, you know, some of them, it just really didn't age well, you know, so that sort of adds to the level of it being difficult to go back and play and sort of enjoy. So that's why, I mean, I think everyone in the world would love a Super Mario 64, you know, either, well, I mean, a remake would be amazing, but or HD, you know, sort of bring it to life a little bit, you know, and that's, you know, obviously sort of like the crown jewel of the system, you know, or up there among them. So it's definitely an interesting point of history for video games, and I mean, obviously a critical, huge jump for the industry. So I think it'll always be, you know, fondly looked back upon with those sort of, you know, rose-tinted glasses. But when it actually comes down to it, you know, I think it might be one of those, oh, I love those games. Yeah, I don't need to go back and play them.
Yeah, for my money, I mean, there's a downward trajectory or trend with Nintendo's home console, starting from the NES, right? Or maybe starting from the Super NES. No, the NES sold more, sorry. So NES to Super NES to N64 to GameCube, like, each successive console sold worse and worse. Whereas, you know, PlayStation, like, they, after the PS1 was successful, the PS2 was incredibly successful, and they've continued on being successful ever since. Nintendo hasn't really turned it around. I mean, the Wii did well, and then the Switch is obviously doing very well too. But the N64, you know, commercially, I don't think it was a huge success, especially compared to PlayStation. And the legacy, I think, is mostly first-party titles, right? Like Mario 64, Smash Bros. 64, Mario Kart 64. You know, we remember multiplayer classics like GoldenEye, obviously, the Mario Party games. there's not a ton. Like I don't think you could
Legends.
name many. Well, Gauntlet Legends was really fun, but I mean that's an arcade game,
it was
right?
a
It's a
port.
port. So like you think about the tried and true games on the N64 that really stand out. Like there's maybe a dozen, like maybe a little bit more than that. I don't know. I think a lot of people would be hard pressed to name a ton of games that they would really want. Like that's why it's funny. I think that people are clamoring for N64 games to come to Switch. Like they're not really gonna look that great on your big TV. They might look okay on the small screen. Like I think Mario 64 actually looked pretty decent playing it on the Wii U tablet screen. But on Switch, a lot of those games, like if they're the multiplayer ones, and you want to play them on a big TV with other people, like the original Mario Party games or Smash Bros, like I just don't think that's going to be a great experience. So I think the legacy, like Casey said, it's a lot about rose-tinted glass. It's a lot about nostalgia. A lot of people grew up with N64 being the first console that they owned or the first one that they bought. They maybe a lot of the people that are still interested in gaming today, the people that had an NES as their first console, maybe a lot of those people have moved on, or they're not just interested in gaming as a hobby. But the people who have a fondness for N64, especially, and GameCube, still seem to be very prominent, and you still hear those voices. So, what's the legacy? I don't know. I think it's 3D platformers and multiplayer. I think outside of those two genres, I don't think there's a ton of great games, and I certainly don't think there's a lot of games that necessarily hold up all that well. Some of them have better versions, like the Zelda games. Like I think the 3DS versions are better. I would rather go back to Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask with the 3DS updates that they did. I think they're more playable, and it's kind of great to have those handheld as well. The legacy, I think, is maybe as people get older, I think N64, there might be less fondness attached to it, just because that first kind of 3D console, not a ton of the games hold up today. And I think Quest is one of those that doesn't hold up super well. It's just kind of okay in that category.
Yeah, I would say the same. It was funny that you bring up 3DS, because I was going to say that most of the games that are worth playing on the Nintendo 64 have already been brought to the 3DS, because even Mario 64 had, I think it was the DS that had the Mario 64. Yeah, so I mean,
but you could play it
if you had a 3DS. Yeah, you could basically play all the games worth playing on a 3DS. And anything outside of Nintendo and maybe Rare, I think, or like you probably count on one hand the memorable games outside of those two companies, really.
Yeah.
There just wasn't a whole lot. And it's going back, like, I have a lot, like I have the ability to reconnect like my retro consoles to my HD TV. And now and then I'll put them up together or play with the kids just so that they can kind of see what I grew up with and stuff. And the Nintendo, like the original Nintendo games that I grew up on, like I can still play them from start to finish. Like I can throw in Paperboy and enjoy it from beginning to end. I can play Super Mario Bros. 3. I could play Double Dragon and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I still enjoy playing those games like to completion. I mean, not as often as I used to, obviously, because they're old games and I play them 1,000 times. But like if you said if I had to do it for something, like I would enjoy it. I've tried doing that with some of my old Nintendo 64 games. Like I put that probably like hundreds of hours into GoldenEye back in the day. Like whether it's getting the 007, doing all the 007 modes to unlock the extra game mode in GoldenEye, or playing multiplayer with my brother for countless hours. But now when I try to play GoldenEye, like I get past the one mission and I'm like, yeah, I'm good. Like it's just
yeah, pretty much.
I don't know. It's like after you've played more modern 3D games, it's just it doesn't feel the same. Like the old Nintendo games, like I feel like they retain that the fun factor where that just doesn't exist. Like it's disappearing in the Nintendo 64 games. And I think, like you said, with the people who are asking for those games now, I almost think if you put them in the Nintendo Switch Online, they're going to, like, the legacy will fall further, because people, when you play them again, you'll actually realize that they're not as great as you remember. So I almost wonder if they'll just not bother because, like I said, the best games have already been brought to 3DS, so they might as well just stick with those. And I mean, it's not a competition, but there's when you look at original PlayStation games, especially RPGs, like some of those games are really expensive to get because like they're still fun to play. Like when you look at like all the Final Fantasies, like 7, 8, 9, all on the original system, and then you got like games like Xenogears. Like I've been trying to pick up, and then I've been trying to find Parasite Eve, which is super expensive. Like when I do find it, they want like a couple $100 for it at certain places.
Jeez.
Like,
yeah, that sucks.
which is crazy. And yeah, like these games, I mean, it's still early 3D graphics, but they just the way that they're made is just it still has that kind of same SNES feeling of playing, but just with different graphics. And I just think I think memory, like the memories are just a bit tainted because you said, we were kids then, and that was all we had, and we were really into Nintendo at the time, and so those feelings of kind of like, and they're the games that you probably haven't played in a while. So yeah, I just think like the further we get from it, the further it's gonna feel like, you know, these games are, you know, they're good. We have them for historical value, but I don't know if the fun factor is gonna be there as time goes on.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think that takes us to the end of Last Call. So, kind of good discussion on Quest 64 today. Hopefully, for people that have never come across the game, look it up. Take a look at some videos and maybe a playthrough, or consider picking it up yourself. I think there's definitely something there that might surprise you or be interesting to you. Want to thank everybody for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Thirsty Mage podcast on your podcast app of choice. We're also on Spotify as well. I suggested last episode, I think, or a couple weeks ago, that you can try listening on different speeds. I tried the 1.5 times. I think that's too fast for a lot of podcasts, but 1.2 still works out for a bunch of them too. So if you're in a hurry and you're trying to catch up on your favorite shows, maybe try the 1.2 listening. It's kind of a fun thing to do. I want to thank Casey for joining us for this episode. Obviously, he was the man behind the drive to get Quest 64 done on the Thirsty Mage. And I for one, I'm glad that we had that opportunity. I'm glad you pushed us to do it, Case. I think it was a fun experience.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you guys took the trip down old memory lane, and I know, like I said, I figured even if it was terrible, it would be fun to talk about. So
it's not like we haven't played terrible games on the podcast, and not like we won't continue to do so. I think we'll let you have another choice. Maybe in 2021 you can start thinking about what game you want us to play next year. But
SMT4.
No, it won't be that long. We're playing SMT. I want to play all the SMTs with 5 and the remaster.
Have you
3
played
coming out.
4 at all?
Oh yeah, I played 4 and Apocalypse.
Oh, Apocalypse is so good.
I'm a huge fan.
Oh.
I'm a huge fan. Yeah.
I need to get 4 out of the wrapper.
Sure.
Yeah, I got to get 4 out of the wrapper.
Well,
and we gave away a copy of 4 a couple of months ago, so I know that subscriber to our YouTube channel is looking forward to that episode as well. Next week we've got kind of a special episode where I think our plan... David, you want to detail it? Because you're a little bit more involved in that, in setting that one up.
Yeah, so there's... we like our retro games here, and there's a little-known retro game that came to Steam called The Revenant Prince. So we're starting to play it now, and we're going to be talking to it was made by a one-man developer, and so it's Nomina Games, I believe, is the developer. So it's just one gentleman who worked on it, and we're going to be having an episode with him next week after we've played his game. It's based on old Final Fantasy and Tales of Mana. Did I say that right? Tales of Mana?
Yeah. Trials of...
Yeah, it's based on the turn-based games, like kind of like Final Fantasy. So it has so far, like I played a little bit of it. It looks pretty. The music was nice. The graphics look nice, and I'm looking forward to getting into. It's got a neat looking combat. I watched the trailer bit. Combat mechanics. It's kind of old school, but with like a little new age flavors. So we're looking forward to playing that. And but yeah, it's going to be nice to talk to a developer and kind of find out their inspiration, the games they grew up with, and how it affects how they develop a game. And really just finding out how one person can make quite a game. Like this is a pretty long game from what I've read. It's a full gigabyte on PC, so it's got some meat to it. So it's going to be pretty neat to kind of get an idea of what kind of time, energy goes into making an RPG. So we're looking. It's going to be fun, kind of seeing the other end of the spectrum on RPGs.
Yeah, definitely, and I know as soon as you read the description or found out that it was inspired by Final Fantasy, especially the turn-based ones, we had no choice but to invite this developer on to talk with us. So yeah, that'll be fun. Definitely a different kind of episode for us, but I hope you'll join us for that one and check out the game, The Revenant Prince. David, is that the title? Yeah, yep. If you can check that out, that'll be cool. So we'll be playing that soon. So that's the plan for next week. I know we've got some other episodes cooking. We've been talking to Casey and Perry about a crossover involving NES Classic Crystalis, so that should be coming around sometime in the next month or so, hopefully. We've got an episode on Final Fantasy IV coming soon, an episode on Earthbound, two of my absolute favorite games, so that'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, a lot of good stuff cooking in the Thirsty Mage Pub's kitchen right now. Had to stretch to get that one in. But yeah, thanks again to everyone for joining us and Casey, and we hope everyone enjoyed listening to us talk about Quest 64 and kind of reminiscing about that period of gaming and 64 PlayStation 1 era. And that'll do us for tonight. Actually, no, I always want to shout out what's happening on the Thirsty Mage YouTube channel. David, what's happening? What do you got going on?
Likely this week, if you head over there, I would imagine that Friday, Casey and I would have had a stream of, since we're recording this before the stream. I don't know if we're 100% decided on what it was yet, but it's going to be an RPG of some kind. Yeah, it'll be something. It'll be something and something fun. So, it'll be our second stream going. So, hopefully it'll be... We're learning it as we go, and hopefully, if you don't catch us live on Friday nights, then we'll make sure to have the video up so that you don't miss any of it on our YouTube channel. So.
Mm-hmm. Just because it's somewhat topical and it's an RPG. My review for Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Remastered Edition just came out today, which is we're recording on Wednesday. The game comes out on Thursday the 27th. I think it might even be available to download now. There's a light edition, which allows you to play a little bit at the beginning of the game, and also lets you play with someone who has the full copy of the game, so that's a kind of a fun way to try it out. I wasn't super high on the game. That might be an understatement, but check out my review on nwr.com for the full details there. There's a video as well. We might even play the game together, the three of us, or anyone else we can rope into doing some multiplayer and maybe get a YouTube video of that as well. So stay tuned to the Thirsty Mage YouTube for some potential Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles content in the near future. But I think that'll do us for tonight. So thanks again to everybody for listening. Hope you have a good night, good weekend, and we will talk to you soon. Goodbye.
See you later.
Bye.